I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is the Readathon. And I'm here with, I'm going to say it, my favorite Readathon partner, Mel Barrett. Hi, Mel.
Hey, Rebecca.
Sorry, Kevin. You're probably not listening anyway, so you won't even hear that I have said that. Mel, do you want to remind everybody who you are?
I am Mel Barrett, the host of the In Between podcast, which is an investigative true crime podcast.
Well, today is May 27th, and we had what you thought might be the prosecution's last day. I don't know. I still think they're going to bring their dog bite expert, don't you think?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is it for Hank.
It's climactic.
Yeah, should we place a bet?
They had that whole hearing about the dog bite, but maybe what they wanted him to do now he can't do with those fake forensic odontology dog bite molds. So maybe that was the whole purpose of him.
I also think that he would get into trouble on cross with that guy because of all the bad paperwork on Chloe/Cora. And I mean, it's just a mess. If he decides to go with that guy, he's digging himself a hole.
I think that Welcher is actually a good last witness if it's his last witness.
Yeah, I agree.
Today we had Dr. Welcher from Aperture, who apparently did not lie about his education. He used to own the company that then became Aperture after it was acquired. He didn't go to medical school. I never buy the bullshit story of my dad said I shouldn't. I never buy that. But he says his dad said he shouldn't, so he became an engineer. And he does have some biology background and does data, crash reconstruction, and the biomechanics stuff. So what did you think overall of Welcher and his affect and how he came across to the jury just as an expert?
I was thinking about this today because I thought about, I think about Dr. Irene Scordi-Bello, and I think about, all of the women who have testified are very humble and nervous, and they want to get it right, and they want to make sure they're doing a good job. And all of these men come off as just like full of themselves, and they're there to explain it to the lay people and blah, blah, blah. And to me, the juxtaposition between the two, between the men and the women, and I don't want to turn this into like a sexism kind of thing, but these men really annoy me, and I don't like being talked down to. And so I'm wondering if any of the women on the jury are having the same feeling from some of these men, like the Dr. Wolf, I would have stopped listening to him because
Dr.
he
Wolf
turned
1,
me off.
not Dr. Wolf 2.
Yeah, Dr. Wolf, like the animal.
No, he said like the real one.
Like the real one. He also talked about cavemen. Yeah. So that's my impression is, again, this guy, if you think about the way that like Buchanan would sit on the stand, he would like kind of like lean back and man spread. And this guy was doing the same thing. Did you notice he like had his arm up on Bev's?
No. And that's what's interesting. You know why I didn't notice it?
Why?
I spent most of today listening to testimony and not watching it because I was doing a bunch of stuff. I was full transparency. I went to Lowe's and I listened there. I bought some flowers and some dirt and I listened there. I came home, I planted everything in my little boxes on my deck. I listened there. The only time I watched was when he would say he had a reenactment or reconstruction that was video, and I wanted to see those.
I can't wait to get to those.
So I watched the reverse one. I watched, and I watched some of his I did watch some of the John O'Keefe's driveway stuff. I found that stuff very interesting, and his recreations there were cool. But I just want to say thank you so much for taking the majority of the notes today that we can go from. I do remember that Welcher testified about three things, essentially. He testified about the car stuff, what happened that night, what I like to call the, quote, murder stuff, which we haven't heard of any of in this trial. He testified about a second area of exploration was whether or not Karen Reed's car hitting John O'Keefe's car at 5 a.m. could have caused that taillight damage. And number 3 was essentially, did John O'Keefe die by getting hit by a car? Which, as Alessi pointed out, that's kind of the purview of the jury to decide. But so let's get to the substance. So we started with these trigger events. I will just say, I do think that Welcher explained this stuff very clearly and very well. Whenever I've heard any testimony before about trigger events and key cycles, all I hear is numbers and blah, 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 blah. He did a very good job, I think, with all of his testimony, laying it out and telling like a story of how he got there and what it means in a way that other witnesses could not. But what do you think of this testimony? Again, we have the 2 events in the key cycle. And for listeners who don't know, a key cycle is you turn your car on, and when you turn it off, that's the end of that key cycle. So apparently Lexus records events. I'm surprised they don't record some event, like certain kinds of events, but they apparently record like reverse and, wheels going or whatever. What did you think about what he had to say about this key cycle evidence? Because he's, again, putting this 3-point turn, and thank God the prosecution has given up that 3-point turn that killed John situation.
Mm-hmm.
He's putting that 3-point turn about 8 minutes before the event that he says is the rear acceleration that killed John O'Keefe.
I think it's interesting because two things. He based his report on information from a lot of different sources. Some had nothing to do with the case. They were just sort of research sources. But he also based his report on Trooper Paul's report, as well as Burgess's research.
And Karen Reed's statements on TV.
How many times did he bring that up? I was like, dude, I mean, like, we know that you're getting paid by the prosecution, but give it a rest. But, so the idea, one of the things that stuck out to me is, and I wanted to ask you about this and what your thoughts and opinions were. So he's saying that there was a key cycle which happened at Waterfall. So when they left the bar, Waterfall. And then he's saying the first trigger event, which is that 3-point turn that happened in the driveway after she passed 34 Fairview, which I have a point to make about that. But what were you thinking when he said the first trigger event happened 19 minutes after the first key cycle, when it only takes 6 minutes or so to get to 34 Fairview?
I was thinking that Karen used her phone to start her car in advance so it could warm up before they left.
Interesting. I think I would have to, because we have all of the timestamps from the video of when they left and everything, so I'd have to go back and cross-reference that. That is a definite possibility.
That's the only thing I thought of that it could possibly be, because it obviously did not take them 19 minutes. And the one thing that I think is interesting, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like these key cycles are not tied to time. So they just sort of they used mileage to basically guess that this key cycle corresponded to that night, and they basically added up the mileage between Fairview and Meadows. Did he say Meadows to Jen McCabe's house? Because that would be in there too.
I don't remember.
Jen McCabe's house back to Meadows.
Yeah.
And then Dighton. So he added up whatever miles he thought they were and said, based on the mileage in the car, this key cycle should be the key cycle. And I'm like, but what if that key cycle is when they backed the car onto the flatbed?
Yep.
Could be that. That's a time you'd go in advance. And he talked about wheels spinning with acceleration. Yeah. And I'm like, well, there was no fucking snow on the ground on the night of January 29th. And if you can tell that the wheels are spinning, that indicates to me that this is going in snow, not on bare ground.
There were a couple of times when the wheels were spinning. And then I felt like there were a lot of discrepancies today, and I'm hoping the jury picked up on it, because one of the things that he was saying was that, I don't remember if it was the trip from One Meadows to Dighton, but he said it took an hour and 45 minutes.
That's too long.
All right. Exactly. So there's a discrepancy there. The other discrepancy that I noticed was that there's a couple of things. So if we are to think that this 3-point turn happened, so it happened, she passed Fairview, like she missed the turn, right? It goes against what Trooper Paul's report said, if that's the case. That is also backed up by Ryan Nagel's text that Jen McCabe got from Julie Nagel that said that he pulled up behind Karen at 12:23. If this trigger event is happening at 12:23, which is the 3-point turn, their times are off. Absolutely
the times
off.
Are really off. That I picked up on.
Yeah. And he's relying heavily on Burgess's knowledge and his report about the clocks and, this 30-second time drift and everything. Here's the other thing that I was just like, this is so hypocritical. They're relying so heavily on matching John's phone for data for the 3-point turn to match the time and to do all this stuff. But they're completely disregarding that John could have climbed 3 flights of stairs.
Exactly.
And this is my issue with the prosecution and these reports and their witnesses. They are picking and choosing what works for them, and they are changing their data to make it fit into the rest of the story constantly. I'm hoping the jury is seeing that, because I don't feel like it just happened today. I feel like Burgess did it. Whiffen did it. Every single major witness they've had that has dealt with data forensics has changed their reports to match something else in someone else's testimony, or they're picking and choosing the data that works for them, and they're just disregarding the data that doesn't work for them.
There's something else like that actually I wanted to point out, because I have in my car, and I just used it today. Like, I don't use it that often, but one of the screens that I can have on the display in front of me, my car is like all screen, which I have feelings about. I miss some of my buttons and dials. But one of the screen options is to show your average miles per hour and your average miles per gallon of gas. Mm-hmm. And when he said today, because I think it was very interesting that Brennan brought up the how long would it take to get from Fairview to Meadows, because he's thinking about that 1236. It's the first time he's ever acknowledged that that data point exists. And he said it would be an average, I believe he said 35 miles per hour would be the average time. What he didn't say was the average time also includes when you're not driving and you're stopping at stop signs. Right. So the average time being 35 miles an hour means she have been flying back to Meadows. The average was, I just did this today. I drove, about 5 miles from where I walk my dogs to my house. And, I probably went 35, 40 some of the time, but my average speed when I got home was like 18 because I also had to sort of go slowly up a hill. I had to stop at a stop sign. And so it's just that average 35 miles per hour thing without that additional context is a little bit sus.
Well, I find that the way that they're figuring out time, and I mean, obviously I'm not an engineer, I'm not a forensic data person, but there was one thing, I am a filmmaker. And so one thing really stood out to me. And this is something that was, that made a lot of sense to me because of what I studied, at film school. Here's something I really don't understand. This was point 2, when he was making the point that the damage in Karen's car couldn't have come from John's driveway and hitting John's car. They know what kind of Ring camera John has. There are pictures of the Ring camera. It's in the reports. They have the Ring camera reports and the video, so they know what kind of Ring camera John has. So Welcher testified today that in order to figure out the timing and like frame by frame of the video, they use the frames per second to figure out the timing of when Karen hit John's car exactly, right? For some reason, they ran the video through these 3 programs that he discussed in his testimony. And those 3 programs told them that Ring camera was recording at 19 to 19.8 frames per second.
Right.
But John could have only had one of 2 models of Ring camera during that time.
If it was a Ring, right? Which it was. No one's disputing it was a Ring.
It says Ring right on the screen on the video. It's a Ring camera, and that's the whole thing about them, having to subpoena Ring and trying to get all the video and everything like that. So there are 2 different models of Ring cameras during that time. One of them, the lower model, recorded at 15 frames per second. The higher model, which had like sort of a floodlight, which is the one I think John had, even though
because you see that light pop on. So unless he has a separate,
he uses the flood to sort of use the graphic.
Right.
That one records at 24 frames per second, which is basically 1080 whatever. So I don't know if this is something the jury picked up on, unless there are some technophiles or somebody on the jury who understands frames, but. If you're telling me that the video was recording at even if it was 19.8, it's not right, which means you have miscalculated the timing and the frames. So he's even using, so if you look at one of the graphics, it says frame 369, right? Shows like a moment when Karen is about to hit the car. If they are figuring out what frame that is based on the frames per second, they are wrong. So is that how they're doing the rest?
You heard it here.
Is that how they're doing the rest of, is that how they're figuring out the rest of this shit? Is it like, is that what they're doing? Because
say this again, because the model camera that John had, the Flood Cam Wired Pro, because only 2 models available at that time, the Flood Cam Wired Pro or the lower model?
Yeah, there was a very, very low model, but based on the video footage and based on the floodlight that I could see, there's no way that he had that very low model. So he could have had the spotlight model or he could have had the floodlight model. But doesn't really matter. The spotlight model is the lower and it records at 15 frames per second.
Okay.
And then the higher model, the floodlight model, records at 24 frames per second. Neither one of those is 19 or 19.8 frames per second. So if they ran this video footage through these 3 programs and came up with the median of, let's say, 9.5 frames per second, 19.5 frames per second, it doesn't match those 2 cameras, which means they're using the wrong calculation to figure out frames per second.
Interesting. So, I mean, for listeners who didn't see it, the frames per second is important because that's how he calculated the speed of Karen's car as it was backing up. I'm telling you, so I said something to you and I said something to Kevin today that surprised both of you. since I mostly listened, I didn't have a lot of the biases that I sort of come into these things with like, look at that guy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I today felt for the first time like Karen Read could be convicted based on this. This is the only witness they've put on, the prosecution has put on, that's made me feel that way. And it was largely because of his demonstrations around the reverse driving, which was we'll just call them point 1, point 2, and point 3, the 3 areas he investigated. Point 1 was the key cycle stuff, and it showed the reverse driving and her going 24, which, by the way, is still way too fucking fast to be going in reverse. But in the number 2 area, the driveway and the collision area, I found that what he did, for those who didn't see, is it was very Star Wars, and not Star Trek, but kind of Star Wars, like a 3-dimensional scan, a recreation. They bought a fucking $70,000 used Lexus, same model, same whatever. They did all these 3-dimensional scans, and they were able to lay their scans over the driveway, and they were able to demonstrate to the jury that the scan was exactly the right size, because they said, look at that fence post. I thought all that stuff was great. And then it was basically like, you can see where she hit the car because the snow was dislodged there, and I examined the car and whatever, and there's no damage. And we basically recreated it, and we got no damage to our taillights. So right. I thought that was actually compelling. What did you think, besides the frame rate stuff?
Honestly, I think that moment doesn't really matter anymore to the case. But because of the frame rate stuff, I thought you're miscalculating everything. If this is how you're coming up with the calculation, you're wrong. So if they're wrong about this, was Burgess wrong about the time drift? To me, they're grasping at straws and they're grabbing things and they're going, oh, this fits into this bucket. This fits into this bucket. That makes it work. Perfect.
Yeah.
They're not trying to get to the truth of this. They are trying to make something fit.
That is how it feels. But what he presented today seemed legit. I mean, to a lay person, and I'm, again, trying to put myself in the mind of a jury, someone who's watched a million episodes of CSI or Law and Order or whatever, what this guy did today looked like what a TV expert does in a TV trial. Like, he had all this high-tech stuff. He explained things in a very linear way. I mean, there's some basic questions. Like, if we're to believe Ryan Nagel, which I do, because talk about not having a horse in the race, like, he does not.
Well, also there's a screen grab of the text.
Right. But if we're to believe him that Karen was alone in the car when he saw her in the car at 12:23 or whatever, then what the fuck were she and John doing for 8 minutes? So there's a whole thing where there's an 8-minute difference between, they say, what was the 3-point turn and the reverse event that ostensibly killed John O'Keefe. What were they doing for? Say it took them a minute to get there from the... So what were they doing for 7 minutes? If they weren't fighting in the car, which Ryan Nagel would have seen them doing, where was John? What were they doing?
I think that you are right that he might have convinced the jury of certain things up until step 3.
All right, let's talk about step 3.
Step 3 was a circus and a shit show, and he's a clown.
Well, it kind of fell apart, but so again, we're coming at this from a we don't think Karen did it because these people suck point of view, because we've seen evidence contrary to that. And I just want to remind the listeners, if you think I'm being biased, you will see and hear evidence that will get you maybe to where I am. Where I am is based on the evidence the defense put on at the first trial. And that evidence largely came from the Department of Justice and the FBI. Whether or not the jury knows that or not, I know it. So a lot of my stuff is based on that. So I think ARC is going to come on. They're going to do an incredible job. They're going to get beat up on cross by Angry Hank. But, today, ARCA would never speculate that, he was murdered by a car. That's just not what they do. But there was all sorts of problems with his testimony today. Now, you remember there was a pretrial hearing about what Welcher could and could not testify to and what slides he could and could not present. And it seems like there's a change in his slides between then and now, because he was voir dired on that at the start of the day, which the jury didn't hear, of course. And it also seems like there was some shit in there that the jury was not supposed to see because it had misleading or prejudicial text. And I don't know why the defense didn't pick up on that in advance. Maybe they did, and maybe they had that conversation in a sidebar. We didn't hear it. But yeah, so why don't you talk a little bit about what happened in part 3? Yeah,
my understanding, just what you were speaking about, is that he was supposed to redact his slides before he got there today. And that didn't happen. And that means, and I don't know what information was there that the jury saw, but I know that Alessi definitely kept objecting.
And his objections were sustained, which says a lot.
It does. And at one point, Alessi, Hank Brennan, and some other guy, I don't even know who it was, they had to go up and stand around Welcher at the stand and go through one by one the slides. Like, it happened. I don't think the jury was there for that.
I think they weren't, but it was an open court.
Yeah, it was an open court. It was such a strange moment.
Because that sidebar at the start of the day was it started when I was walking my dog. I then had another 15, 20 minutes of walking. I drove 5 miles home. I got home. I made my list to go to the garden center. I drove to Lowe's, which is in a different town. And then as I was getting back in the car after picking out a ton of flowers and buying 5 things of dirt, that's when that sidebar was I don't want to speculate, 45 minutes is a really long sidebar.
It was like a 20-minute sidebar. And then for some reason, Bev called a 20 to 30-minute recess.
Right. Weird.
And I don't know why.
So that's what accounts for all that silence.
Yeah. So back to point 3 in Welcher's research and testimony. I understand this. This reminded me of Kathleen, I can't think of her name, from Making a
Kathleen
Murderer.
Zellner?
Zellner. Yep. It reminded me of the experiments that she did in the second half of the Making a Murderer documentary.
Second half was so bad.
So bad.
The first half was so good.
It reminded me of this. Is this the part of the testimony that you actually watched? Because if you had watched this part,
I did.
I
watched
cringy.
When he would say, "That's me." So I watched that part when he was using himself in the demonstrations with the grease paint on the taillight and all that stuff.
Not only was he using himself, he went and got John's hoodie.
Yep, same jeans.
Not John's actual hoodie.
Same brand of jeans.
Same jeans, same sneakers, same t-shirt, same hoodie. Yeah.
That's fucking prejudicial.
That's what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. He dresses up like John because he's about the same height. He's 4 pounds heavier than John. And he stands next to the car. They had this one image of him. It was a close-up image of the back of his head. It was from the side. And they were showing where the spoiler was on the back.
Which he didn't know the name of. He was calling it a wind wing or something. I'm like, that's a fucking spoiler. Literally. Well, maybe it's just an East Coast thing. We all call it a spoiler.
Yeah, it's a spoiler. Anyway, for a moment, I wrote in the notes oh my God, they're going to say the spoiler hit John in the back of the head.
No, but they did say it hit him in the eye.
Yeah, they said it hit him in the eye. But anyway, he then proceeds to do these experiments where he puts grease paint, bright blue grease paint on the tail light that was shattered. And he's dressed like John, except for the fact that he takes the hoodie off and he rolls up the sleeve of John's shirt. And then he does this weird thing where he flops himself on the car and rolls off of it with his arm. And the blue grease paint covers his arm where all the scratches on John's arm.
You mean that 100% definitely dog bites?
Yeah. And so it's so there you go. That's how it happened. And it was just come on, buddy. And then there were a couple of other things. One of the things that he said that really kind of pissed me off, and I don't think anybody objected to it, but they should have. He said he used the glass from the waterfall.
That's right. Well, he said he ordered a glass from the same distributor as the waterfall.
But it's never been established that the glass actually came from the waterfall.
Correct.
So prejudicial. Yes. You said this to me in text. You're like, oh, it was kind of prejudicial. I was like, yeah. And then, so he dresses up like John, takes the hoodie off. He does all this stuff. But here's a question I have. And this just popped up for me today. And I don't know why I didn't think about it before. They keep saying that she backed into John.
That's what I was trying to say. He's in the wrong place for her to have backed into him.
If John gets out of the car and you're going to rely on his phone data that says he is walking northwest or whatever it is toward the house, he is not behind the car. She would have to drive up onto the lawn to hit him with the back of her car. Mm-hmm. Why are we not talking about this?
That's exactly right. She would, and they're trying to intimate that he was hit in the road, which is wild.
And he wasn't.
And she would have had to, according to their key cycle data, she would have had to drive forward a while and then back. And that was like a 10-second event. Do you really think John O'Keefe wasn't going to get out of the way in 10 fucking seconds?
Right. Even if he was drunk, he'd be like, oh, shit. But also, he wasn't in the road. He was never in the road. If he gets out on the passenger side, he's stepping into the lawn. Mm-hmm. Which is insane. There were a couple of quotes I wrote down from this part of the testimony where he said, we don't know in the text stream data when he was hit. We also don't know the exact impact speed.
Wouldn't they know? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If you don't know that information, how can you say this beyond any kind of scientific engineering, blah, 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 certainty?
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. See, but I hope the jury's like you, but I heard all that stuff and I was like, oh. I mean, I wasn't like, oh, Karen might be guilty. I was like, oh, this is convincing. There were aspects of his testimony today that did actually convince me. And when I say convince me, I mean convince me, the proxy juror, that there is data, because Hank Brennan's whole case, and he keeps saying it, is data. And he's saying that on purpose. He's trying to inoculate himself against the ARCA guys who are also going to be bringing in data, and their own cell phone dude who's also going to be bringing in data. Like, he's trying to inoculate himself by saying, I have better data and I'm doing smarter data, and listen to my data.
Can I just bring up 2 more points that really
bring up whatever you'd like? That's why we're here.
There's that scuff on the bumper.
The bottom part of the bumper. Yep.
In his reenactment of what he thinks happened to John, he said, well, John was wearing jeans. He was wearing denim jeans. And so they show this close-up picture of the waistband of Welcher's jeans standing next to the car. And it coincides with the scuff. He is literally telling the jury that the car hit John, his jeans scuffed the car, but yet there were no injuries to John's hip.
That's right.
John had no injuries in that part of his body.
He had a cut on his knee, which they say now was caused by the bumper. They literally are trying to make things fit. You're right.
They really are. And then here's my only other point. If a car can hit John and throw him 7 feet off the roadway into the yard, how did it not register as a trigger event?
Yeah.
If a 3-point turn is a trigger event, how can a car hitting a human body not be a trigger event?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I just want to say there's this classic episode of Law and Order SVU, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Christine Lottie, for a little bit of time, was the prosecutor, and was an alcoholic, and she was super problematic. She ends up leaving the show, by the way, by getting murdered. But when her alcoholism comes to a peak is when she says mistakenly shows at trial this recreation video she made, which had the killer, it was Scott Foley from Felicity, who played the suspect, where she had sent it to like some like animation shop or whatever, and it was like, this is our demonstration of how the killing could have happened. And she had pasted his face. She had them paste his face onto the animation body. Mm-hmm. And so the second they showed that in court, the trial was a mistrial, and that was that. And they ended up losing because she did this. I was thinking that today when I was watching him wearing John's clothes. It was completely unnecessary for him to wear John's clothes unless he was going to like let himself get cut or whatever. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was, he was talking about the presentations he's done and the experiments he's done on sideswipe injuries and at a conference. Do you remember what he said about doing those demonstrations at a conference?
Mm-mm.
He said they used human volunteers. So one of the things we're going to hear from Dr. Rentschler, I believe it is that human beings almost never the injuries with sideswipe injuries are nearly non-existent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, getting hit by the back of the car, the front of the car, head hitting the road, whatever. But sideswipes and clips are not, generally speaking, serious or fatal. And they could use human volunteers to do the same kind of stuff that they're alleging killed John O'Keefe at this conference. Like, that really stuck out to me.
That's really interesting. That was the only other part of that third part of his research. He got a crash test dummy, was standing up with it, holding it, and then just opens his arms and lets the crash test dummy fall back. And he talks about like the load bearing on the head. That would be if John were standing still, had nothing to do with the car, and just fell backwards, what you're showing us. You're telling us that this crash test dummy, like, you should have hit the crash test dummy. You should have done that. You should have figured out a way to stand the crash test dummy up.
Like in one of those Barbie stands?
Can you imagine if he had actually like recreated what they're saying Karen did and hit this crash test dummy? Show me if it flew 7 feet onto the lawn.
Right. What they're saying too is that they can't determine where he was standing, how he was standing, or whatever, because there's so many different variables.
He was standing in the lawn.
Yet they're so sure of other things. You're right. So it's definitely, I'm reticent to call it weak tea though, because again, he was not nervous.
He was very confident.
He actually had creds, which his colleague did not. It was like he was acting as an expert witness would on TV, which brings me to the end of the day. So we got to talk about this. So at the end of the day, Brennan is almost done, but not completely finished with this guy. So we're going to have to get him back tomorrow for more direct, but then we're going to get, I think.
He was wrapping it up, though, and I was like, ooh, this is a bad way to end for Brennan.
Yeah. So basically what happened was there were tons of objections at the end because of the way Brennan was asking his questions about his degree of certainty about certain things happening.
Yep.
The one that really got it was to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty. Was John O'Keefe killed by a collision with Karen Read's car? And it was like, objection. And Bev was not happy with any of this.
The end of the day for Bev, she was exasperated. The amount of sighing, did you hear that? And it was like right into the microphone. She was like, just so upset about everything. But yeah, it was a little fiery end to the day. And it was one of those, those hearings outside of the jury where Alessi and Brennan are just like going after each other. But again, Alessi was the smarter of the two and made a better argument.
Yeah, what Alessi essentially said was, it is up to the jury to decide if there was a collision that killed John O'Keefe. That's up to the jury, and he has crossed a line by asking that question. He can't ask it. He can't ask that, and he can't ask it that way.
He said it was resoundingly improper.
And then Brennan gets up and says, yeah, but they argued in their opening argument that there was no collision, so that's on the table. And it's like, well, they're the defense. Like, they have different rules.
Yeah. You are not a defense attorney in this, Brennan.
Opening and closing arguments are not evidence. You can literally say just about anything in your opening and closing argument, and then the jury is supposed to consider the evidence, and then your closing argument is supposed to give your best summation of the evidence. And last time, Lolly did slip a bunch of stuff into their 1 hour long closing that wasn't actually proven at trial, and it somehow kind of worked. But so it was wild. What did you think of that little fight between the two of them?
I just like when I listen to the way that Alessi argues and the way that he uses language is so precise. I feel like even the ands and the a's and the thes mean something to him. And so basically he was like the question of scientific certainty, whether a collision occurred. He compared it to a defendant who has stabbed someone and caused their death. The question is never allowed in the trial. He said it's resoundingly improper. It's something the jury has to decide. The witness can't opine on this question. And Brennan came back to him the way he normally does, which is sort of like a whiny baby. Like, they don't get to define our case. Like, that was the first thing he said, that they don't get to define the DA's case. Welcher studied the text stream data. They didn't, like emphasis on the they, which is ARCA. Welcher's allowed to give his opinion, yada, yada.
They're probably going to say the text stream data is bullshit and doesn't matter. That's probably why they didn't study it.
Well, and I thought it was interesting because Alessi was like, I have ARCA's report right here. You don't know what's in this report.
Yeah.
You're making some big statements here, buddy. He also referenced a court case that I would like to look up. It's Commonwealth versus Coleman. I assume that it's, this exact thing.
Probably.
It reminds me a little bit of what I was looking at in the habeas, for the Pamela Smart thing, because it comes down to what's proper and improper when discussing things in front of the jury or with the jury. Like, a lawyer can't, if Karen Read has 3 charges against her and one of them is driving under the influence, her lawyers, they can't without her permission say to the jury, listen, we know she's guilty of DUI.
Yeah.
If they say that, the case is dismissed.
Yes.
There's a Supreme Court case, McCoy versus the state of Louisiana. There's a New Hampshire case. Lawyers can't do those kinds of things when they're speaking to the jury. So allowing the witness to do that. And I also, going back to what you were saying before about this witness sort of being prejudicial. He also, right before the last objection, one of the things that he did I was really pissed off about, when Alessi asked him what he based his opinion on, he talked about his research and everything they've just seen and blah, blah, blah. He said, well, I saw Karen Read's interviews as well. And he said, and there was also DNA on the bumper.
Yes. What the
fuck was that?
Hugely prejudicial.
Yes. Because he's literally saying, even though the jury should know this by now, because we've really hammered the point home, he's saying John's DNA was on the bumper, so of course he was hit by that car. He is discluding the 2 other profiles of DNA that were on the bumper. So by saying it that way, it's so prejudicial. And
it makes the DNA more important than it is, yeah.
It does. And the expert witness shouldn't be doing that. I mean, Alessi's absolutely right. It is improper.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't think the jury will, again, I think this guy was a compelling witness. I don't think the jury will pay as much attention to detail as we are. But he kept talking about how the taillight below the taillight was broken, protruded farther out, and that spoiler protruded farther out than everything, right?
Yeah.
So how the fuck would there be DNA on the bumper if he was hit by, A, the corner of the car, and B, if he was hit in the eye by the spoiler? Doesn't that jut out farther than everything else below it? So how the fuck would he be hit? Like how would he get bumped? The DNA in the bumper has never made sense to me because he put groceries and stuff in the car. Like he did all those things that, couples do.
And it also could have been his niece or his nephew. It was maternal. It was on the maternal side. So it was nothing. That is completely like the DNA it's shot. It's not worth anything.
I don't think the DNA does not matter except for the presence of other people that could matter.
But the point of the matter is that if they're saying that he was scraped up by these taillight pieces and he was hit in the head by the spoiler, why is there no blood or any kind of matter on the taillight pieces? Yeah. And why is there no salt inside the taillight housing? And why, like, if he had a laceration over his eye that was bleeding, when you hit something, you transfer blood. Like when something hits your head, you transfer blood.
Right.
And so there would have to be some, even if it was in a snowstorm, there would have to be some traces, like snow doesn't wipe away blood. Yeah. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you're right that he was a compelling witness and he was good for the prosecution, but he was only compelling because he was so adamant that he was right about these things. And the issue is if you...
And the 3D scans were cool. I'm sorry, they were. They were fucking cool. They were. I'm sorry.
Okay, when he was able to like disappear the car and it was just the tires.
Cool.
Okay, that was cool.
And you could see the tires in the snow. Like that was fucking cool. It was.
Yeah, but it didn't compare to the black slides that had white and red writing on them that nobody could read, even him, or his picture of, John's occipital bone with like green marker like drawn on it. I mean, there was...
Also, scratches on cars, they're shockingly easy to get, but getting it from a pair of jeans, a scuff on your car from a pair of jeans.
I was like, come on, buddy.
I'm a car maniac. Like I have a subscription to a car wash. I get really upset if there's like a ding or a scratch. Like because my car was expensive and it's like it's honestly the most expensive individual thing I own that isn't my house. Yep. And so like I care about my car a lot. I can tell you one thing I wouldn't worry about is somebody walking up next to it in a pair of jeans and rubbing their jeans on it. I wouldn't worry about that. Stick, yes. Banging your door into my door, 100%. Having to squeeze next to my car wearing jeans? No, I wouldn't worry about that.
That's one thing. Like there's a smudge on her car. There's whatever they're calling it on the car, a scuff. Honestly, I don't know how jeans scuff a car like that. Unless they're saying it was like the metal brads or whatever on the jeans.
No, but it would have been at his knee. It would have been at his knee level. There's no brads at the knee level.
But at the same time, there would also be injuries on John.
Yes.
If a scuff occurred from jeans, that means that he got... Anyway.
All right, so what do we have to look forward to tomorrow? We're going to get Hank's reworked, maybe, depending on Bev's decision, final questions to this guy. He's going to probably go backwards a little bit and try to hammer in how smart and great this guy is. And then we are going to get the beginning of our cross-examination. What are you looking for?
I can't wait. I can't wait. I think that Alessi is going to tear this guy apart. And I don't think he's going to go. Yeah, I do. I mean, you could already tell. And I think this guy, based on whenever Alessi would object or when he would approach and have to talk to him today or during the voir dire, he was starting to get a little snippy with Alessi, and Alessi was schooling him, basically. And I thought it was amazing. And I thought...
The voir dire seemed to be about, by the way, other people's testimony before this and whether or not he had access to it. That's what it seemed to be about.
Yeah.
And, because he said, I changed my time based on, quote, better data that I got from Burgess. That to me is the clearest evidence that they're just making it fit,
Right. Well, not only did Burgess change his report and submitted it on, the 8th, and then the defense got it on the 11th, this guy also changed his report and his slides and submitted them within 8 to 10 days ago, which I don't think anybody knew he was going to do. And that's what the whole voir dire was about, because they didn't have any sort of arguments or hearing about it the way that they did about Burgess. So I don't even think that the defense knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's just another thing there. Yeah.
If this were Arca, Hank would lose his fucking mind.
And so would Bev. come on. It just feels to me like Whiffen created this bucket and they're all throwing everything into the bucket to make it fit. You know? Whiffen.
Our friend Whiffen, and then Mr. Tuft himself, Burgess.
Mr. Tuft. Do you remember the part of the voir dire where Alessi was like, so have you been hearing about your colleagues' education issues? And he's like, oh God, I can't. I've gotten a million emails about it. Did you see that part?
Yeah, I think what he meant is that the public is harassing him.
The public is harassing him. He's like, I go to open an email. It looks like a regular business email. And I open it and I'm like, the court says I can't read this.
Bullshit.
But also, let's be very clear. This guy doesn't really care at this point. He sold his company to Aperture for $270 million.
Yeah, he's a salaried employee, or
he doesn't care. Maybe he cares because he thinks it's fun to do all these like laser shows, but I don't know.
Okay, so we just talked briefly about the money that the state has spent on this one set of experts. They not only bought a car, but they had the car shipped from Texas to California. They flew this guy to Massachusetts to do reconstruction stuff and scans at 34 Fairview and reconstruction stuff and scans at John O'Keefe's house. They sent him, it sounds like, every piece of material they had to prepare for trial because he had to list everything he used to prepare, and it was like, why did you send him that? Like, that makes no sense. They sent him Trooper Paul's fucking report. Like, why? I kind of want them to bring Trooper Paul on now and just be like, tell us about your report. And just have it be very contradictory to, what's his face's report.
I did experiments and stuff.
Yeah, I kind of want them to bring Trooper Paul in as a friendly witness, not as a...
Oh, I felt so bad for that guy.
I have to say, as much as I, like, it's easy to sort of... when I talk about Trooper Paul, I'm actually making fun of the prosecution, not... Because it's like, clearly the guy is out of his depth in 100 million ways, and that is the system's fault. And it's also his fault for probably having too much confidence. But the fact that a system would let, and it says everything, that they have almost no state experts this time, almost none. And every expert they have is the only one with the opinion they have.
I think one of the starkest comparisons is that in the last trial, Trooper Paul was supposed to be their Welcher.
Yeah. Yes.
How scary is that? That a woman's life is on the line. And Trooper Paul was supposed to... like swing for the fences and bring it home.
Listen, he did stuff. He did
experiments and stuff.
All right. So tomorrow is cross-examination by Alessi starting.
Can't wait.
I am looking forward to it, as are you.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not we talk again tomorrow, we should talk about it next time we talk.
Absolutely.
For sure. But I have a feeling I'm going to want to talk to you again tomorrow if you have the time. So we'll see. All right. Thank you so much, Mel. Let's wrap up this edition of the Readathon and looking forward to tomorrow.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Partners in Crime Media.